Hello, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm not too bad, Musa. How are you?
I'm all right this week. This is thinking around the question. My name is Dr. Musa Sami. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, and we're joined by my very esteemed friend, Dr. Jonathan Newman, who's a social anthropologist and a connoisseur of all types of aesthetic knowledge, theories, and philosophies. We're presenting a podcast today, thinking around the question, where we take a topic, often which is topical, often which might be coming from life experience, and we think around the question. We think about what it means, and we never really kind of get to the point. Isn't that right, Jonathan?
It could be. I mean, maybe we'll get to the point this time, if there is a
Maybe,
point.
maybe, sure. But I want to, Jonathan. You know the Ayatollah Khamenei is dead, and he died yesterday. He was killed in a American airstrike, which was probably he was give they were probably given the coordinates by the Israelis by some very clever intelligence work that the Israelis had been doing, and therefore after almost 47 years of the Islamic Republic, Khamenei being uh, the spiritual leader and successor to the Ayatollah Khomeini from Iran. He is dead, and I think that it would be kind of try and discuss anything else. This is such a um, important time and point of view, which will probably change the world quite dramatically. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Let's just think about what this means, and how do you see this?
I want to know why you think it's so important.
Why is it so important?
Why is the death of this man so important? You didn't talk about war, you didn't talk about bombing, you didn't talk about politics, you talked about one person dying. Not by
Mm.
natural causes, one presumes. But why is that important to you?
The war has been going on for a long time, hasn't it? In some form or some fashion or another. There's been a war between Iran, America, Israel, Iran's proxies, of course, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. That's been going on for a long time. Uh, but the death of Ayatollah Khamenei is really quite shocking, isn't it? It was, although it was always on the cards, um, it really changes the dynamic of power in the Middle East, doesn't it? And it's something that I've grown up with, you've grown up with. It's always been in the back of the news somewhere that there's this great evil uh, empire called Iran across the world. It's wicked. I think this is the language that's been used by Trump, by the I believe the defense minister this morning. Um, and nobody's going to shed a tear for Ayatollah Khamenei. That's what we're told, which is not actually quite true. Um, and therefore, it deserves its due consideration, isn't it? Why have we got to this point, and what is going to happen from here? Mm,
I'm somewhat confused.
sure.
So I mean, in a sense, Iran hasn't dominated my life. I live in a seaside town in England. It's not the biggest thing of my days.
It's dominated the news, though, hasn't it, Johnson? I mean,
It's
I
been
think
it's been in the news because it's been in the
for
news
decades, for decades,
for
Jonathan.
decades since 1979. Iran's been
Yeah.
in the news, and Iran's had well, many states have sort of problematic foreign policy, but Iran has run sort of it's funded a whole set of micro wars and possibly some quite big wars too. It's seen that as part of its function. It's seen that as part of its identity, and of course it does that not as an isolated player, but as another state doing the same thing. Everyone's at it. It's not everyone, but an awful lot of them are at it, and that's what it's doing. And but it is funded, if you like, a less theatre of war, probably funded those too, and also these sort of what's called terrorism, this stuff that comes a bit closer to the randomness of where you are, and seems unfair, uh, and horrific. Where's battlefield war? Less unfair, less horrific. I mean, it's just stories we make up. They're not real, in that sense. They're real to us. But so I don't know what Iran is. I haven't got a clue. Never been there. Don't know if I'd know what it was if I went there. It hasn't loomed large. It's loomed in some of the headlines, but along with the next headline and the next headline and the next headline, I don't know who Ayatollah Khamenei is. I remember the Khomeini, but I don't know who these people are. I realise that they've been demonised to some degree, and I realise they are quite demonic in some degrees. The put down of protests also suggests recently in Iran. I mean, horrific putting down of protests, 30,000 people. It suggests here's also a regime that can't legitimise itself without force. It requires beating down those who oppose it from within, without mercy, and by spreading that net far. So it's highly problematic. But what I don't get in all of what you said is why the death of this one person matters. It makes any difference. How's your reading of it? Why is this figure so important, and what comes after it?
When Saddam died, or Gaddafi died, or when Assad fled Syria, they ushered in new eras. Sometimes, or Mullah Omar from Afghanistan, you remember him, when these people have died. Sometimes, in fact, most of the time, those eras that have been ushered in have been even more problematic than what was contained. For example, Iraq is a great example. It later seemed to transpire that Saddam was probably keeping a lid on many of Iraq's ethnic, religious tensions, strife, these kind of things. Similar was the case with Gaddafi. And therefore, their being removed from power were important incidents and events in world history. And Khamenei is probably much the same, isn't it? But Khamenei represents, or the Ayatollah Khamenei represented a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And it's really interesting, Jonathan, that on the one hand that you take the line that I don't know why this man, the death of this man matters so much. I don't really know much about him. And we can drill down into that. On the other hand, that the spiel that you've just given me has told me that you have quite a lot of either information about him or quite a lot of some degree of some views about him, which may or may not be true. We can talk about that. I don't disagree with everything that you've said, but there's certainly a narrative that you've taken on, even if you deny having taken on that narrative.
And the narrative is what?
Well, the narrative there that you've just given me is that the Ayatollah Khamenei was a deeply problematic figure, who was autocratic, dictatorial.
I don't recall using those words at all. I just
no, you didn't. You didn't say that. But you said who killed his own people, who killed 30,000 of his own people.
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did it with a former government. But yeah, I mean, what do you think? No one was killed recently.
No, of course, people were killed in the process. I don't know. Actually, I don't sit in the levers of government of Iran. To be fair, Jonathan, right? And I don't know how it works, right? I don't know if the Ayatollah Khamenei gives the order or doesn't give the order, or if there are, and I don't disagree that there have been deeply problematic features of Khamenei's leadership. But I think that we really, to understand this man, and we may never actually understand him, we really need to understand the context of what's going on, and the fact that we are often only presented with one side or one particular point of view, isn't it? And people in Iran, similarly, or in that part of the world, Pakistan, which is a neighboring country, are similarly only offered one point of view, and therefore we end up often thinking about cross purposes and unable to kind of reconcile why we have these very, very differing views, and that is all epitomized in the personhood, for example, in this instance, of the Ayatollah and what he
I,
represented.
I'm not quite getting. So be explicit. What are you driving at here?
The Ayatollah was a hero to some people. He was a savior of the Islamic Republic. For some people, he is a great warrior, and for other people, he's a demon and he's evil and he's wicked. And probably the truth actually probably rests somewhere between the two, like all of these things. It's probably his legacy is probably very, very complicated. It will take time to dig out. But I think it's really important to think about the context of why this state of affairs has come to be.
Can we do that in just one second? Because
Yeah.
can you have someone who is a great person who's responsible for the slaughter of many, many, many innocent people? Is that morally possible?
Firstly, I'm not defending Ayatollah Khamenei, right?
I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Just asking as a philosophical question.
Sure, I think that if you look at the history of Mughal India, which I know a bit more about, or you look at the Second World War, which I know a little bit about, not great, but there are those individuals who are lionized by one community and are an anathema to another. I'm thinking in Mughal India, I'm thinking of the great emperor Aurangzeb, who is a hero to the Muslims, essentially, or to particularly kind of devout, pious Muslims, and is the murderer or killer of I think the children of the Sikh gurus, and he's really is seen as a brutal kind of murder. If you look at the Second World War, there are great debates about Winston Churchill's legacy. Of course, he's a hero in Britain. He is seen as having that kind of dogged spirit which has got us through the war. Of course, he was also responsible for the Bengal famine. There's lots of allegations of racism and other things. So yeah, I mean, these things do exist, don't they?
But I think you're starting to hit it. It's not just a moral. Well, some people like it, some people don't. Some people turn a blind eye. Some people see only that. The fact that you lionize these figures who decide that they are the one chosen, either, I mean, chosen by what, I wonder, but they're the one chosen to lead millions of people and to make decisions on behalf of millions of people and to decide, godlike, who lives, who dies. I decide today where are we going to do the killing today, in order for you to lionize me some more. Why do we give these figures the time of day? Why is there this sense, as you say, some people will be very upset that he's dead, but they know full well what he's done.
Yeah.
Some people, but they know full what he. I can think of a country I know reasonably well where the person in charge was responsible for mass killings of many, many people. But people love him because they felt those people needed to die, or people near those people needed to die. It didn't really matter. Can you morally be both? I don't think so. But
Well, I think Jonathan. I mean, we will all, from a Muslim point of view, we will all have to go and meet our Maker and explain our actions to him. You may have a different conception of things. I appreciate that, but there is one truth. But there is, I think, there is certainly an understanding that people can have very different views on the actions of an individual. Khamenei represents the culmination of probably a century long history, which starts with the British often being, the colonial powers and having massive power over parts of the Middle East. You could take it back centuries, thousands or millennia, but let's start there. And the finding of oil in that country, in Iran or in Persia, and the appointment of the Shah, the Shah's family, and the I think it's called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which used to be known as the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. A revolutionary prime minister being elected in the 1951, I believe, called Mohammad Mossadegh, who decides that he wants to nationalize the oil for the benefit of the Iranian people. This obviously does not go down well with the British and the Americans, particularly with Churchill, who comes up with Operation Boot in order to get Mossadegh out. I mean, this really happened, right? Mossadegh is eventually removed through nefarious means. The Shah becomes autocratic. Increasingly, the Shah of Iran is probably a narcissistic figure, becomes increasingly unpopular. There are these kind of competing factions within Iran of, the clerics, so the Shia clerics. We might talk about why it's important that they're Shia in a moment, but the Shia clerics, the monarchists, the communists, eventually the clerics win, right? And Khomeini comes to power, Ayatollah Khomeini, in 1979 through a revolution. As you might know, they seized the American embassy. That causes massive problems for Jimmy Carter, causes really problematic headlines throughout the world. Go on.
I'll just get to the chase. I feel like I'm reading a timeline, but what's it mean?
How did the Islamic Republic of Iran justify itself? It had to take a particular point of view, didn't it? It had to take an Islamicized version of political Islam. And that meant certain actions which went down very badly with the West, right? For example, the calling of America Great Satan, I think Israel Little Satan, the fatwas on the satanic verses, and the gradual Islamicization, or I should say gradual, the sudden Islamicization of public spaces in Iran, which became deeply problematic for the people of Islam. But this was the kind of utilization of Islam to maintain political power, right? Yeah. But that doesn't. Yeah.
I'm still lost on what you're trying to say.
Well, I'm just saying that the Islamicization of Iran was a reaction to the political forces which had preceded it. It's a problem with modernity clashing with the aspirations of the people, and Islamicization, modern Islamicization of the nation state, is essentially a reaction to that.
Okay, so we have a So in other words, whatever we're doing in history is a result of previous history. Whatever we're doing,
sure.
And we're not responsible for it because it's just we were forced here by destiny. And if we are responsible, I'm not going to answer to any of you people. I'll just answer to the gods who've already put me in this position as it is. This is also where I'm meant to be. So in other words, and hang on, they're not the only ones playing it, because of course the people who declare war on them and the people firing those bombs at Iran are playing exactly the same game. This is the modus operandi of anyone in charge. I was forced into this situation by the circumstances of history, nothing to do with me, and I will now act out my violent needs in the name of that history. And I will answer not to you. but I will answer to the gods when my day comes. No, it's
I
a
hang
free
about.
ticket.
I think no. I think that's being a bit facetious, and I don't think Khamenei would have seen himself in that mold. He would have seen himself
Sure
as
not.
he would have seen himself as kind of the Islamic scholar who was
Pious.
who was pious, who was bringing back the tradition and the religion to the land and defending the Muslims. Right. I think this is what Khamenei would have seen.
Defending the Muslims?
Yeah, or defending
All of
the
them?
concept. I think that
Killing quite a few. I don't know if you noticed that the Iran-Iraq war killed quite a few people.
Sure.
And as I believe, if you killed 1 or 2 protesters or 30,000, he was killing Muslims. And when he's done proxy wars across the world, he's also been killing Muslims.
Hey,
what about who are the Muslims he's protecting?
Yeah, sure. So, Jonathan, I am not justifying Khamenei's actions in the Iran-Iraq war, or the killing of the protesters, or of the maintaining proxies for militant groups. Right? I'm not going to justify that. Right? I'm just answering your questions, Jonathan.
But what I'm trying to pick out is whether, as we look at the complexity of history, and we look at the responsibilities of leadership, and we look at supporting those who feel oppressed and possibly are oppressed, what we're willing to justify in the name of that. Because you see, there's yet another war. This one didn't even go through this went through no process, no legal process whatsoever. I mean, there's a myth you referred to earlier, which is, we don't know what trouble he's sitting on. We didn't know until after the Iraq war how much Saddam Hussein was keeping trouble at bay. But we did actually know that, because in the run up to it, I remember watching interviews with people from the Arab League in the United Nations going, the Americans are mad. They have no idea what Iraq is. They think it's just 2 groups. It's so many groups. They have no idea. They are absolutely about to cause hell. And that was in the run up to the war. So we do understand, or we should understand. I mean, not necessarily the warring parties will understand, or they don't care, because destabilization is also a tactic. But they do know that these figures. I mean, there's a mythology, isn't there? Of course, Saddam held down the trouble, but perhaps there wouldn't be trouble if there was a better form of government. Trouble is also poor government. If all you can do to keep the Irish from rising up is to shoot them, and they seem to, for hundreds of years, keep rising up every time you shoot them, and you stop them singing, and you stop them dancing, and you stop them speaking their language, maybe that's not a very good form of government. Maybe you're incompetent and you rely on violence. Just a thought.
Jonathan, I don't think that anybody suggested Saddam's government was a good form of government. It was the rupture and probably the illegal way that the rupture was brought about, which led to catastrophe and cataclysm. Yes. And essentially, we're going to be in the same position with Iran right now. Well, no,
we can imagine. Yes,
I can tell you, it's going to be a disaster. I can turn the air blue and give you a few choice 4-letter words. This is going to be a disaster. You have no idea. This is going to be.
Take me into this, because this is what I find interesting, because the Iraq War was a appalling understanding of a place. And I spoke to someone once who had provided some of the intelligence for the Iraq War.
Before we do that, can I just, in the interest of balance, right? Yeah. So, I just want to say that I think there were redeeming features of Khamenei that I don't think have come to the fore. Khamenei was actually against nuclear weapons. He authored a very famous fatwa saying that these weapons were un-Islamic. Iran never gained nuclear weapons during his lifetime, although the last 20-25 years of British news, the Western news cycle, has always been about Khamenei getting weapons. Despite the challenges that Iran has been under for several decades, the Iranians are an amazingly well-educated, reasonable, rational population. I remember in the late 90s watching a documentary on. So the BBC had gone into Iran to do a documentary on Islamic divorce law, right? And they were, you could see the documentary makers, they were planning to do a kind of women's rights kind of piece and how awful this Sharia law must be. Um, and the courts were nothing like that. Well, they actually, they got to um, real problems, about, custody, about property, about all of these kind of things, which were being solved in a kind of Sharia related manner. But you couldn't say it was any better or any worse than what was happening in Britain or anywhere else, right? So he has, Khamenei certainly has been demonized for his system, right? So I think you have to look at both things together. There were terrible things that happened. There was also a great demonization of what his
Okay,
intentions were. Yeah.
so look, Iran keeps, if once you go somewhere, no matter what the circumstances, you get to see normal life, and what you're saying is the judicial system, in certain areas, already many areas worked very well. We have this figure who may or may not be responsible for things, who apparently there is no nuclear program, but he may or may not be responsible for that. We don't know. It's very hard to see what's going on, as it is possibly with many governments, but it is particularly hard, and we don't speak the language, and we don't really understand it. That is absolutely fine. What we do understand is that there's things which don't gel particularly well with how can we put it, a non-violent form of governance. And all governance is violent, but here you have someone who's, his form of I don't know how much control he has. There's a lot of people involved, I'm sure. But this idea that you have this so-called Islamic State, which they've declared it as their version of Islam, just like Israel declares itself its version of Judaism, and on and on. Everyone plays games with that. I'm sure they take it seriously and don't consider it a game, but it's just something to do. But they do that. But they seem to have sewn in something quite oppressive in it, something quite brutal in it, as a necessary brutality that forms the identity. And the irony is, we're spending half this conversation looking at Iran and not looking at the fact that someone's just bombed the hell out of them. Yet another one of these might is right forces. What do we do with the violence? That's what I want to know. What do we do with it? Do we?
Well,
do we just look at the pros and cons and say, well, yes, the courts were good on divorce, but yes, they did have a lot of people dying in political prisoners, and they did murder 30,000 of their own kind on the streets because they felt a bit threatened by it. But the divorce laws are fantastic. No, we can't do that. That's wrong.
No, Jonathan, I think you're being facetious there. I think
I'm not. Because how can you defend something as not all bad because good divorce law?
In the defense of the regime, which and of course I'm not Iranian and I don't have any access to the levers of power. What the regime would probably say about the tens of thousands of people that were murdered, I think they would probably dispute that the number. And I have no way of knowing the number. And I think what they would say, and there is some truth to it, is that for several years they were being destabilized. For 2 or 3 years, there have been recurrent, ops against them. More recently, they felt that this was the regime's view was they felt they were being destabilized by external forces. There was certainly some evidence of that. There was a currency crisis, all of these kind of things. Then there was an internet blackout, and we don't know how many people died, and I don't know the sequence of events.
Was there some sort of fire in a substation, or did they black it out?
No. I'm sure terrible things happened there, Jonathan. I'm not saying they didn't. But
Musa, I'm going to give you a clue. You came out with the sentence "in defense of the regime."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just doesn't
Jonathan,
trip off the tongue
no,
nicely.
Jonathan. But the point is that your cultural milieu, right, is this Western ethnocentric view, okay, which I think does have to be resisted. Okay, I'm not here to justify Ayatollah Khomeini. I'm not here to justify the Iranian regime or the so-called Islamic Republic of Iran. Okay, I do, however, have several issues with the ways that things are represented in the West. I mean, I've been watching the news today, and I think the Prime Minister of Canada and of Britain and the defense ministers and all of these, they're coming, and even Trump is coming out with how evil this man was. I think Trump said this man was the evilest person in history.
But you expect all that. I mean, that's just the sound. You know, if you listen to rock music, you expect a 4/4 beat. I mean, it's
Jonathan. You know, I could say exactly the same thing about Netanyahu, who is bombing Iran with America right now. You know,
that's right.
I could say that he is one of the most evil people in history. He has been involved in the last 20 or 25 years, and God knows how many wars throughout the middle. But you don't hear that on the
okay.
You know.
So okay. I'm not sure what your beef is. Is it that the reporting of news is not as you'd want it, or is it that there are people who hold positions of power who do so through brutality? I'm not sure which one it is.
Oh,
if it's
okay.
I really don't care. I'm not expecting the news to be any.
Sure. Well, my issue is the narratives that we are given. Okay, we are basically, the West is going to war based upon these false narratives. In Iraq, it's really easy to talk about Iraq now because it happened 23 years ago, and in hindsight, it's all very clear. Although you are right, Jonathan, it was clear to anybody who was paying attention at that time as well. It was going to lead to disaster because it was badly done. I wasn't considering the nuances. You know, Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction. That was a false claim. Most people at that time, the man on the street, I knew it was a false claim. I'm sure you did too, Joseph. 2 million people marched in London. We all knew that these things, these claims were false. We were told again and again by political leadership that no, you know, Saddam has, 30, 45 minutes before he can launch a nuclear weapon. Yeah. Yes, go on.
But let me tell a story that might be useful to that. I once spoke to someone who's responsible for part of that intelligence.
Sure.
And he was explaining, didn't talk directly about that report, but contextually it may have been relevant. And he was explaining how when you do intelligence for a country, it actually takes years. And you're producing a very thick report that is several hundred pages long sometimes. But even that report has to be, and it's full of nuance, it's full of subtlety, and it's full of all these complexities. He said, but even then, you're not allowed words that are longer than, I think it was 12 letters. And you're only allowed so many words on a page, but there's a word length which you're not allowed to overrun. And he said, and then when that gets presented to the senior civil servant, it's reduced down to an executive summary. They don't get to see the thing. And then that gets put on the minister's desk, and it's 2 paragraphs. And he says, and then the minister gets up in Parliament and says 2 sentences. He says, what do you think happens? And I think, because you're going to tell me how things might unfold, this is also part of the deal, that the process, especially in a sort of this aggressive, fast-moving Trump-style politics, where there will be no build-up to the Iran war. It'll just start. There won't have protests on the street. It'll just be in your face.
Well, it has started. Yeah.
But exactly. Whereas Iraq took ages to get going because they tried to go through process, but they didn't, so they carried on anyway. But this, we just shortcut all of that. But it's this same thing of we don't want to know the details. We don't want to understand everyday life. we just want to we just want to reach our target. It's target driven thinking.
Jonathan, can I tell you why I'm shocked and horrified by the whole thing? Iran is a massive country. It's a massive country, overshadows the whole of the Middle East, and I mean, this country stretches from Turkey to Afghanistan and Pakistan. Afghanistan and Pakistan are having skirmishes, as you may know, right, in the last few days, right? And if Iran fractures in lots of different ways, it could fracture ethnically, it could fracture religiously, it could fracture intra-religiously. Um, you know, this is going to be a bloodbath. Right now, what we're seeing, even in the last couple of days, is Iran basically, um, you know, uh, sending missiles to its other Arab neighbors, right? And saying that it's attacking American bases. But of course, this is not going to go down well. This is going to draw God knows which regional powers into it, and God knows which superpowers will get drawn into it. I mean, America is already drawn into it. Um, China and Russia, I'm sure, will have views. This is going to be a bloodbath, and it's not being thought through. And it's a disaster. And what I find really strange is why we, I've been watching news today. Why some people are celebrating this. Why some people don't understand this is the disaster that is definitely going to turn into. You cannot, Jonathan, set small fires in different parts of the world and not expect them to come together in some massive conflagration. Yeah.
People celebrated the Twin Towers being hit, but it was quite obvious what would happen next. It was quite
Jonathan,
obvious.
Jonathan,
Well, hang on. Let me explain the point. It was quite
yeah.
obvious after that hundreds of thousands of people were going to die. That was the price that would be paid. That's obvious. When Hamas moves into Israel last year or whenever it was, it's quite obvious that something awful is going to happen. It is a counter reaction. This is the nature, but in this particular circumstances, I think something different going on. I don't think they care. It doesn't matter if the Middle East destroys itself. It's stuff to be gained in the ashes. I don't think there's actually a human care going on in this one at all. I don't think it's about that at all. The human being isn't being considered. It's all about if it destroys itself, if it becomes just a chaotic order, then maybe in 30 years something will come of it, and they'll see what it is then. This is proper disrupt things.
Okay.
This is proper break things and see what happens. It's awful.
Well, all right. Let's just take that point out. Maybe that's the one slightly somewhat perversely refreshing thing here. From my point of view, in Iraq they didn't care. They told us, they spent all this time telling us. So you have to take my point of view. I was a young British Muslim man at this time, kind of realizing and I might have spoken to you about this before, coming to the point where I realized that really, my voice and people who look like me, our voice really didn't matter, right? And that's why many of us were very disaffected by the Iraq War. They spent all this time making the argument. They didn't actually make the argument. There was something about second resolution. You might remember they didn't get it. They went in anyway. Yeah, it wasn't really multilateral. The first thing they did once they captured Baghdad, you might remember this, right? I remember this all very, very well. The first thing that they did when they captured Baghdad was they sealed off the Ministry of Oil. And that kind of made it really obvious, I think there's a really good BBC documentary. And then there was Iraq, something like that. You can see, you could go back and watch this. It makes it really obvious what it was all about, right? When they went in for Libya, after Gaddafi fell, 1 or 2 days later, the French minister, for commerce or something, is telling, all his French businessmen, compatriots, the British and Americans are trying to seize up the contracts. You need to get in there first. these things kind of become really obvious, right? Um, when they invaded Afghanistan, which was ostensibly because of Mullah Omar and because he wasn't giving up Osama bin Laden, and as to keep the world safe, right? And they were talking about reconstruction of Afghanistan. I don't know if you remember this. This was from September to December 2001 that they were undertaking the war in Afghanistan, right? Sometime by I think September 2002, they have something called the Bonn Conference, right? Where Hamid Karzai comes to Bonn, and they talk about, well, all this reconstruction that you promised for Afghanistan, where is it? It's not happening. So the fact is that from my point of view, Jonathan, they've never cared. And these are just the examples that come to mind. These are just the examples that come to mind, right? Now, yeah, you're right. Trump doesn't care. Netanyahu doesn't care. They really don't care what kind of mess they cause in Iraq. Probably or in Iran, sorry. The main goal, the main target was just to decapitate the regime so it's not a threat for Israel. And that has probably more or less been achieved in some sense. And what happens with the rest for the rest, it doesn't matter. If they all, become refugees and come to Europe, that's not their problem. That's Europe's problem.
Let's look at another aspect of empire and war. Yeah. And resources are never too far away. The Romans go up to the north of England because there's a bit of salt up there. This is part of what's going on. If you look at the wars in Congo, it's because it's volcanoes, and volcanoes bring up minerals to the surface. They're very good at doing that. But of course, it means there's a lot of resources and a lot of stuff to plunder. If you look at the current American administration, it's got an eye on Venezuela, which has vast amounts of oil wealth. As a nation, the nation with the most oil wealth. As looking at Greenland with all its precious metals and these very important metals in the age of tech. And if you look at Afghanistan, by the way, incredibly resource rich. And if you look at Tibet, very resource rich. So this is, yes, if oil is where it's going to be in the last stages of oil, because it is in the last stages of oil until something else comes or is allowed to come, then these places become highly valuable. They become places that have to be taken. It's almost like, people running out of money and there's a large bank there to be robbed. That is where it's going. I mean, the thing is, the previous sort of very awkward, loose sort of sense of a set of rules which people more or less followed. They didn't really, but you kind of had to, you weren't going to be the absolute drunk of the party, but you might, you might pitch a bit of the booze before you left. You did that, but you didn't smash the place up. Well, that's gone. We're now going to smash the place up. We'll be that sort of party guest. This should be unsurprising.
I think the thing is, it will ultimately lead to blowback and various problems, both for Israel and America. I think we both know this, right? Deep down, I think probably the world should know it, Today they have their day. They have their moment. They've killed, Khamenei, and a whole load of other leaders besides. They've knocked out much of the communication and command center. But there's no way. These things, war is unpredictable. These things will come back in some fashion, maybe through terrorism, maybe through the destruction that it brings. Trump now owns this war and the destruction. He's brought himself into another one of America's forever wars. After having campaigned on and promised that he would not do it, he seems to have walked himself straight into it. Yeah, sorry.
No, I mean, it's just fascinating, isn't it? And one has been quite clear that this is the sort of person who would go to wars. His ticket is, I won't take you into war. But he's a very bellicose sort of personality who's already been having skirmishes here and there. He's very warlike. The man who avoided the draft is very warlike. And the people around him are particularly warlike. They like it. They like that aggression. It's part of who they are.
Jonathan,
But hang on. Here's the real point. That actually doesn't matter. Because actually, if you look at the history of the American administration, of which they're just part of an ongoing, it has always been warlike. So the idea of America not having a war is quite strange. And when people come into government, what they're faced with is the administration they're in and their responsibilities and the gameplay of where the game is. I suspect they were always going to go to war, and I suspect you could find the trajectories back. Before Trump, this is who America has become. It has become a warring nation. It's been almost permanently at war since the Second World War. Almost permanently. So, what on earth? Why did we think it'd be anything else?
Jonathan, do you know how many U.S. presidents went and fought in Vietnam?
Probably none.
Do you know what happened with all of them?
College.
Clinton College. I think Biden educational deferment. Trump had bone spurs. Who's the other one? Obama was too young. Fair enough. Who's the other one? There's one other, isn't there? Oh, Bush. But Bush, he had some medical issue as well, right?
But he liked a flight jacket. They like the gear.
I mean, so yeah, this is what's bizarre, right? All of these have been war presidents, all of them, right? None of them have ever fought in one or sent their children off to fight in one. Unless you could correct me here, right?
I'm sure we'll find that since the Second World War, they're probably, especially since the Second World War, they probably were early on, but perhaps not. But it's almost the side point. It's the fact that you have a form of government which, no matter how radically it changes, doesn't really change its spots. We think the Trump administration is radically different to previous American governments. In fact, it's proving itself slightly similar. It's doing something perhaps in a slightly different fashion. It's not going through process, but it's doing what they always do.
In Urdu, we call this topi drama, right? Topi is the hat, that you wear, right? And it's this idea that drama just means drama, right? That the hats kind of change places, but it's the same thing that's going on and on, right? And even I think you saw that with Obama as well, who came in with this kind of radical ideas of change. In Britain we saw this with Robin Cook and his kind of ethical foreign policy, which kind of floundered at the first hurdle, right? These governments have behaviors that don't change and keep doing the same things. And particularly, what's frustrating for me is in terms of foreign policy in the Muslim world, particularly, they do the kind of same thing, which is try and move faster and break things. They really break things. They go from bad to worse, and they don't learn. And it's bizarre. It's somewhat bizarre to me, Jonathan, given that, for example, this country has such a history of understanding of Muslim population. It has massive Muslim populations in its midst right now, and it doesn't want to learn from them.
But there's something about politics, and there's something about business, and there's possibly something about militarism. I think less so there, but the gamble is part of it. I mean, don't forget, if you're involved in sort of frontline, high on business, and if you're involved in frontline, high on politics, it's about getting a daily hit of gamble. You're always on the edge of possibility. You're not sitting back going, what's all the facts? Let's take it. Let's put this through the computational methods. Let's see what it's at. I mean, you can see it with climate change. They're taking a gamble that something will come, but they don't know what it is yet. As meanwhile, let's keep moving forward. They're gamblers. I mean, basically, leadership, in some sense, is handed over to these personalities that are gamblers, narcissists, psychopaths. It's what we love in people. And of course, they produce results. I wonder if statistically, if we laid it out and found if they hadn't been there at all, whether it'd make a fixed bit of difference. All they did was create the destruction. I'm not sure I mean, here's the good news. Here's the good news about war. Warlike people take on warlike people. That's the reason we're in this mess. And you can look at the arms industry, you can say, well, it's needed. It is needed. There's these people. Yes, that's right. There's these people here, and we've got people just like them here who are going to take them on. As a psychiatrist, don't you worry that there's something slightly psychopathic? It has been socialized. It's got narratives about warriors. It's got narratives about nation and just wars and just causes. But at the end of the day, aren't we just the flies to some battling psychopathic gamblers?
One of the things I often think about is, the nature of property rights, Jonathan. Property rights are absolutely fundamental to our understanding of the modern world. I don't know if you ever thought about this, right? I live in my house. Right? I live in my house, right? Actually, I happen to live in a rented house, but even that in terms of British law, I pay the rent, and I have the right to enjoy the possession of this house, undisturbed. How did property rights start, Jonathan? I presume that they started with violence. Somebody sketched out, this is my land, took their stick, said, this is mine, and anybody who comes here, I'm going to beat them to the ground and I'm going to win it. And then, some people came together and they made kings and, so on and so forth.
Here comes the and there's we have to respect it and then dig it apart a bit. Then we get the Charles Tilly view of sort of history. That's right. You start off with these sort of independent things, and in a sort of Hobbesian way, you get these little warlords, these gangs that come, and then the gangs sort of fight amongst themselves, and eventually they sort of become states, and then the states fight amongst themselves, and then we get some sort of international. Beneath the anarchy, we get some sort of international rules-based order. But ultimately, a state is just a very institutionalized form of a gang. But by then it's spread out way too much. It's no longer just that selfish interest. And in a sense, we can look at it in that sort of bureaucratic way, and it's very attractive. But what's taken out of that is that the figures involved bear enormous similarities. I mean, the fact is, you and I are sitting here, like almost the entire population, not thinking, "Oh, we should be in charge. Oh, yes, I'm the man. I'm the one to do it. I've got some good ideas." In fact, what I say is going to make everything better. In fact, I'll tell you what people should do. They should do exactly what I think they should do. We don't do that. Most people don't. And the thing that makes a politician so good is they have what is called a thick skin, meaning they don't listen to the criticism, and they believe in themselves. But maybe a thinner skin and a bit less self-belief, a bit less hubris, might be what society needs. Meanwhile, we're attracted to those who have deep voices and beat the drum.
Well, when will we, as an electorate, learn, Jonathan? What I saw today, I saw, in all of this stuff about Khamenei, I saw this fascinating interview with Zach Walensky and Laura Kuenssberg. Laura Kuenssberg, obviously, very experienced journalist, right? And Zach Walensky was giving kind of self-evident line that, whatever you think of Khamenei and so on and so forth, what has just happened is just illegal. There was no justification for it under international law, and it's something to be resisted. And Laura Kuenssberg was, she took me back quite some time. She was asking kind of questions like, what is your alternative? What could we have done? Why, why didn't we go down this path? What, are you honestly being realistic? It was almost this kind of drumbeat of war. It's almost an accepted thing. This makes me stand up and think, we said exactly the same thing in Iraq. It was the drumbeat of war becomes louder and louder and louder, and then before we know it, we are in the fire. And we're bringing coffins back home, We're killing hundreds of thousands of people. There's Lancet papers being written about how the deaths, this has happened again and again and again, how the deaths are definitely an underestimate,
So
you know?
let's come back to
Yeah,
our reporter, a sort of an experienced reporter. And there's
yeah.
part of asking questions where you have to ask the question that needs asking. So if someone makes a point that is, in my mind, perfectly legitimate, you just got rid of your rules-based order. What next? This makes everyone vulnerable. If you just say, well, look, I'm in charge. It's a takeover. It's back to Hitler walking out of the League of Nations. It's this sort of thing. I don't care for you. I don't care for those who would set boundaries for me. I don't want any boundaries other than my own moral boundaries. I believe that's almost a quote, isn't it? When you do that, it's highly dangerous.
Sorry, Jonathan. Are you talking about Hitler there or Trump? Because Trump has just said exactly that.
Trump said exactly that, but it's the same. It's the same logic, and I think leadership comes with that problem. It comes with that burden that you're constantly looking at that of how much do I have to follow the rules, and how much can I do what I want. And what's coming out of that interview is someone saying, this is crazy. Once you let this happen, everyone becomes more vulnerable. But as a reporter, you've got to go, well, okay, that's fair enough, but I've got to push back against this. And so I think it's a fair question. Well, what are the alternatives? Well, the alternatives are to return to a rule-based order. But if one of the major players, and they're major players because of the force they have, if one of those major players refuses to play, what do you do? And in a sense, this is what goes on.
There was, by the way, there was never any question that Iran wasn't playing. Iran, over the last 3 years, played by the rules-based order. It's actually, I mean, people may disagree, you may disagree. It's strikes that were extremely calibrated to not to escalate, but to make a message, Probably because it knew it was on the back foot, right? I'm talking about the strikes between Israel and Iran. I'm not talking about all the other proxy wars that it was involved in, right? It wasn't Iran that tore up the rule book, here.
No, but I don't think that what the point was. I don't think the point is that. The point is the rule book's being torn up. I mean, what do you do when Germany walks out of the League of Nations? What do you do? What do you do when America effectively sets up its own version of the United Nations? What do you do when one of the major players of an institution walks out and says, "I'm not playing anymore"? And you see it in religion. You see it in religion. They set up a separate schism.
Yeah, the Quran has an answer to this, actually. It's a known problem. I can't see if I can get the verse out right now. But the Quran basically says, I probably can't find the verse. Oh, it might be here.
Why didn't you just tell me what it says? Paraphrase.
Yeah. I think the Quran talks about conflicts between brothers or between Muslims, right? But you could think about conflict between respected people, members of the world. It's, you should always judge and tend towards justice. And if one of your brothers, offends another brother, I don't just mean offends, but, trespasses on the rights of another brother, then you should make justice between them. And then you should guarantee that justice. And if if he further transgresses, then you should all come together, all of you brothers, to bring him back to justice. Which is, it's a very simple point. This is the point of the League of Nations. That was the point of the United Nations. And the fact that the brothers in the Committee of World Nations do not do it, and they let it go and they turn a blind eye based upon power dynamics, and some people get vetoes and some people don't, is why we're in this mess.
Yes. I mean, but it's also why some people found Europe intolerable, because actually it held some sort of vague middle ground. You couldn't, but that's also because there's another way of seeing this, which is we are going through revolutionary times, because these institutions are holding a middle ground, and it is a middle ground. It only becomes a middle ground when you see the extremes. but it might not seem so middle at the time, but it's holding some sort of general consensus, very, very tight, hardly controlling it, but it's holding it. And then it doesn't work for other people. And if those people feel they can do better without it, they do better without it. They go off on that path, for better or for worse. They take a gamble and they go off there for their own self-delight, for the delight of their own ideas going through their head, because none of us can predict the future. This is where we live. And yet, this is the saddest thing, because to divide is the easiest thing in the world. It is so easy to walk out the house. To try and bring the family together is a different matter. To walk out of a job, yeah, it's doable. To try and get it working, very hard. To abandon a problem, simple. To get it to work, much harder. These people take the easy route, divide. The skill is in uniting, but and that's why, in my opinion, that's why they so readily find violence, because it is also an easier answer than finding some sort of social cohesion and general consensus. Violence is an easy opt, and whoever employs it is looking for easy answers, even though violence itself isn't easy, but it's cognitively easy for the leadership.
I feel, Jonathan, that at the end of this podcast, we've arrived at the place we so often arrive at, which is a very pessimistic place with very, very little hope for the future. It's not a hopeful message, is it? Violence is the easy answer. We always shortcut ourselves, and we always end up in the same situation, but perhaps a realistic one.
Well, no, I think that therefore the responsibility lies with people to find ways of cohesion and to find ways of bridging the divides. Because whilst people smash it up, a friend of mine, his brother got married recently, and he gave a speech that his brother would build big Lego constructions, and he would come into his elder brother's room and smash it up with a cricket bat, and his brother would just start making another one. And see, one's very constructive. One was just a child who was quite destructive at the time. It's up to us to make construction, probably at a local level, because we're not people who want to run countries. But that's the way. And to listen to those who want to bring people together without division. This is who deserves respect.
Amen to that, Jonathan. Amen to that.
Thank you, Musa. Thank you for a Sunday evening rant.
All right. I'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you.
Bye.